Nightfall descended, leaving the streets silent except for the howling wind sweeping through darkened alleyways. Veronica Carter, an FBI agent, sat motionless in her car, eyes fixed on a decrepit building in the distance. This was a critical stage in her mission to take down a dangerous criminal organization. But before she could make a move, the sharp wail of a police siren shattered the stillness. The flashing red lights reflected off her rearview mirror, casting a glow on her resolute face. A patrol car had blocked the road ahead, cutting off any possible escape. Veronica took a deep breath, fully aware that this situation could escalate quickly. The patrol car's door swung open and Ethan Wallace stepped out. He approached with an air of arrogance, hand resting on his holstered weapon, eyes scrutinizing her with clear hostility. He didn't bother to check her license plate or ask why she was there. The only thing Wallace saw was a black woman sitting alone in a car in a dimly lit neighborhood. Veronica remained composed. She lowered the window and carefully retrieved her FBI badge before speaking. But Wallace had no interest in listening. He yanked the car door open, seized her arm, and pulled her out with brute force. She had no time to react before being slammed against the cold metal of her car, her wrists locked behind her back in handcuffs. The commotion had drawn the attention of nearby pedestrians. Some pulled out their phones, recording the encounter. But no one spoke up. This wasn't the first time someone like her had been treated this way. Ryan Mitchell, the young officer accompanying Wallace, stood by in silence. His face betrayed his unease, but fear of defying his superior kept him from intervening. Wallace dragged Veronica toward the patrol car and shoved her into the back seat. She clenched her fists, swallowing her anger. She had faced abuse of power before, but this time she wouldn't let it slide. The patrol car sped through the night, heading toward an old, isolated police station, one Wallace knew was far from prying eyes and inconvenient questions. When they arrived, he hauled her out and pushed her through the entrance with a sneer of contempt. The holding cell was small, its bare concrete walls and dim yellow lighting exuding an oppressive air. Wallace stood before her, arms crossed, smirking. "You think being FBI makes you untouchable?" he mocked. Veronica lifted her head, her gaze cold and sharp. She had been through too much to be intimidated by a man like him. If Wallace thought he could break her, he had gravely underestimated his opponent. Meanwhile, outside the precinct, her FBI team had begun to notice her unusual absence. A sudden cut in communication was a red flag. They were already in motion. Beyond the holding cell, Ryan Mitchell watched in silence. A storm of conflict raged within him. He knew Wallace was crossing the line, but did he have the courage to stand against injustice? The station was quiet, but within minutes, a storm was about to break loose. Veronica sat upright on the cold metal chair, her sharp gaze never leaving Wallace. In the cramped room, the only sounds were the creaking of an old ceiling fan and distant footsteps echoing from the hallway. She knew Wallace was stalling, hoping to break her down before making his next move. But what he didn't realize was that she had faced situations like this before. Wallace leaned against the table, arms crossed over his chest, his expression smug. He tilted his head slightly as he studied Veronica, as if waiting for a sign of fear. "Not saying anything, Carter," he sneered. "I thought you FBI types were good at making arguments." Veronica remained calm, her lips pressing together slightly. She knew that if she showed any sign of weakness, Wallace would exploit it to crush her spirit. But she wasn't someone who could be broken easily. "Do you really think you're in control of this situation, Wallace?" She finally spoke, her voice steady but laced with an underlying threat. Wallace raised an eyebrow, momentarily caught off guard by her composure. He leaned forward, planting both hands on the table. "I don't think," he emphasized each word, "I know I am." In the corner of the room, Ryan Mitchell stood silently, watching. He could feel the tension radiating between the two. A battle raged inside him, between duty and morality. He knew Wallace was abusing his power, but speaking up could cost him his career. His hands clenched into fists, yet he still hesitated. Outside the police station, no one knew that Veronica's FBI team was closing in. Special Agent Mark Reynolds peered through a sniper scope, observing every movement inside the building. When they saw that Veronica had been taken into an interrogation room with no cameras, they knew time was running out. Inside, Wallace began circling Veronica like a predator sizing up its prey. "You think you're special, Carter?" he muttered. "You think you'll walk out of here just because you're FBI?" Veronica remained unfazed. Instead of answering, she carefully observed Wallace. He was losing patience. He needed her to react, to give him an excuse to escalate. But Veronica wouldn't give him that chance. "Tell you what, I'll make this easier for you," Wallace said, his voice lowering but still carrying a menacing edge. "If you cooperate, I might let you go sooner." Veronica smirked. "I'm not the kind of person who submits to men like you." Wallace narrowed his eyes. Suddenly, he grabbed her arm and yanked her up roughly. Pain shot through her shoulder, but she refused to flinch. He leaned in, his voice a sinister whisper. "You think you can win against me? No one is coming to save you." Veronica didn't respond immediately. Instead, she smiled, a knowing, confident smile. Wallace had no idea that her team was already in position. He thought he had time, but in reality, he had already lost. Suddenly, the door burst open, making Wallace flinch. A commanding voice rang through the hallway. "Take your hands off our agent now!" The front doors of the precinct were kicked open. FBI agents stormed in like a tidal wave, weapons drawn, taking control of the situation in an instant. Wallace spun around, his face draining of color as he found himself surrounded by federal agents, all aiming their guns at him. Mark Reynolds stepped forward, his gaze icy as he locked eyes with Wallace before turning to Veronica, who remained seated, unwavering. "Veronica, are you okay?" Reynolds asked. She gave a slight nod, never looking away from Wallace, who now appeared utterly shaken. He took a step back, sweat forming on his brow as he realized he was the one being cornered now. Mitchell let out a deep breath, finally making a decision. He stepped forward, removed his badge, and tossed it onto the table. "I've stayed silent long enough," he said, his voice low but resolute. Wallace opened his mouth to protest, but before he could utter a word, Reynolds raised a hand, signaling for an agent to cuff him. "Ethan Wallace, you are under arrest for abuse of power, unlawful detainment, and obstruction of justice." Veronica stood up, rubbing her wrists where the handcuffs had left red marks. She looked at Wallace, who was now stripped of his arrogance. "You thought you were in control, Wallace," she said slowly, her voice like ice. "You were wrong." As Wallace was led away, his eyes filled with fear and regret. Karma had finally come knocking, and this time he had nowhere to run. Wallace was handcuffed and escorted down the hallway, his expression a mixture of confusion and simmering rage. But what worried him most wasn't being arrested. It was the furious and disappointed looks from his colleagues. For years he had seen himself as untouchable, yet now all of his power had crumbled in an instant. Mark Reynolds walked closely beside Wallace, his voice cold. "Did you really think you could hide the truth forever, Wallace? Everything has been exposed." Wallace struggled, but the FBI agents holding him gave him no chance to resist. He glanced quickly at Ryan Mitchell, the man he had always viewed as weak. But now, Mitchell was looking at him with unwavering determination. Veronica stepped forward slowly, her gaze sharp and resolute. You made a grave mistake thinking you could silence justice through abuse of power. What's meant to come will always come. Mitchell finally spoke, his voice low but firm. Wallace, I've stayed silent for too long. You didn't just betray me. You betrayed the entire justice system you swore to protect. I can't turn a blind eye any longer. Wallace let out a dry chuckle, but his smirk quickly faded as Mark Reynolds held up a thick case file. You're not just being charged with the unlawful detention of Veronica. We've investigated and uncovered a long list of your past abuses, taking bribes, coercing confessions, tampering with evidence. Did you really think you could get away with it? Wallace swallowed hard, beads of sweat forming on his forehead. I was just doing my job. Doing your job? Veronica arched an eyebrow. Abusing power, arresting people without cause, and manipulating evidence. Is that how you define your job? Mitchell shook his head, any remnants of respect for his former superior now completely gone. You had a chance to change, Wallace, but you chose the wrong path. Now, you'll have to face the consequences. Reynolds stepped closer, setting the file down on the table and pulling out another folder. And that's not all, Wallace. We searched your office. Do you know what we found? Destroyed case files, manipulated reports, and a long list of people who were threatened into silence. Wallace blinked rapidly, his mind racing for a way to justify himself, but the evidence was undeniable. You covered for criminals, distorted justice to serve your own interests, and now it's all coming to light, Veronica stated with finality. Reynolds added, we also have witnesses, people willing to testify in court. Some of your former colleagues, those who are no longer afraid of your so-called power. You will have to face everything you've done. Wallace remained silent, his eyes flickering between fear and anger. But deep down, he knew. There was no way out. Wallace was thrown into the prisoner transport vehicle, but he knew the story didn't end here. He wasn't just being prosecuted by the FBI, his crimes had now become a media sensation. Across news channels, his face was broadcasted under a damning headline, police officer arrested for abuse of power and evidence tampering. Meanwhile, Veronica, Mark Reynolds, and Ryan Mitchell stood before a packed press conference. Cameras flashed endlessly as journalists bombarded them with questions. Veronica, standing firm, addressed the media. This is not just about one individual. This is a warning to anyone who abuses their power to oppress others, she declared. We will not stop at Wallace. More investigations will follow. Her words sent shockwaves through the system. The FBI had already launched a widespread investigation, not only targeting Wallace, but also uncovering officers who had collaborated with him. New names surfaced in the reports, sending the local police department into a state of panic. Mitchell, who had officially resigned from the department, now stood as a key witness against Wallace and his accomplices. Facing the cameras, he made a powerful statement. I will do everything in my power to ensure no one else suffers from this kind of corruption again. But as soon as the press conference ended, Veronica's phone buzzed with an anonymous message. You're meddling in things you shouldn't. Stop before it's too late. Her eyes narrowed. This story was far from over. Wallace was relentless in his efforts to escape. From inside his prison cell, he reached out to a powerful lawyer, one with deep connections to a corruption network far beyond what the FBI could imagine. He knew that if he went down, many others would follow. One evening, a high-ranking officer with a shadowy presence visited Wallace in his cell, leaning in and whispering, "We can still control the situation as long as you're willing to cooperate." Meanwhile, Veronica and Reynolds continued digging through hidden case files buried within the police department's archives. The deeper they went, the clearer it became. Wallace was just a pawn in a much larger corruption ring. The real masterminds wouldn't sit back and let their secrets be exposed so easily. Mitchell, now a whistleblower, found himself in immediate danger. As he drove home late that night, he noticed an unfamiliar car trailing him. The vehicle stayed close, mimicking his every turn. When he sped up, it matched his pace. Feeling the growing tension, he quickly called Veronica. "I think someone's following me," he said, his voice tight with urgency. "Where are you?" Veronica asked sharply. "Fifth Avenue, near the industrial district. I'm trying to shake them off." Veronica wasted no time. She fired up her engine, determined to reach him. But before she could get there, Mitchell's panicked voice rang through the line. "Shit! They're ramming my car!" A loud crash echoed through the call. Then, silence. The call dropped. Veronica's heart pounded as she pushed the accelerator to the floor, racing toward the scene. When she arrived, Mitchell's car was wrecked on the side of the road, the door wide open, the interior empty. Signs of a struggle were evident, a blood stain on the pavement, tire marks suggesting a forced abduction. Reynolds pulled up behind her, his expression grim. "They took him." Veronica clenched her fists, anger and urgency burning in her veins. "We're dealing with something much bigger than Wallace. This isn't just police corruption anymore." She scanned the ground, analyzing every clue left behind. Mitchell had put his life on the line for this, and now he was in grave danger. "We'll find him," Reynolds assured her, "and we'll bring down every last one of them." Veronica nodded, determination flaring in her eyes. "It's time to tear this whole operation apart." She immediately pulled out her phone and dialed a secured number. "I need intel on a high-level corruption network, and I need it now." This wasn't just about Wallace anymore. This was about dismantling an entire system of power and control. Without wasting a second, Veronica and Reynolds launched into a full-scale search for Mitchell. They pulled surveillance footage from every traffic camera in the vicinity. One security feed showed a group of masked men yanking Mitchell from his car and shoving him into a black van before speeding away. "The license plate is covered," Reynolds muttered, scanning the footage. "But we can track it another way." Veronica dialed an FBI tech specialist. "I need a location on a black van, likely heading toward the outskirts. Pull satellite data for any recent movements." Within minutes, a satellite ping identified the van's last known stop, an abandoned warehouse, 20 miles outside the city. Reynolds locked eyes with Veronica. "We don't have much time." She nodded, her grip tightening around her weapon. "Call in SWAT. I want them in position before we move in." Tonight they weren't just rescuing Mitchell. They were going to war. The FBI and SWAT vehicles tore through the desolate roads, speeding toward the warehouse. As they arrived, an eerie silence hung in the air, too quiet. Reynolds scanned the surroundings, then signaled his team to prepare. "We're going in." They split into two groups, advancing cautiously toward the building. Just as they reached the entrance, the warehouse doors burst open. A deafening explosion shook the ground. A flash grenade. Veronica and the team were knocked off balance, momentarily disoriented by the blinding light and concussive blast. But Veronica recovered fast, instincts kicking in. Gunfire erupted. A heavily armed group emerged from inside, opening fire on the FBI and SWAT teams. Veronica rolled to the side, ducking behind an old truck, drawing her weapon as bullets ricocheted around her. "Where's Mitchell?" she shouted over the gunfire. No answer, only more bullets in response. The fight was far from over. Reynolds and the SWAT team retaliated, gradually pushing the armed assailants back inside. As they breached the warehouse, the sight before them made Veronica's blood run cold. Mitchell was tied to a chair, surrounded by multiple surveillance monitors. Standing in front of him was a middle-aged man with silver-streaked hair, an air of arrogance and authority radiating from him. "Welcome, FBI," the man said, his tone calm yet chilling. You arrive faster than I expected." Veronica immediately recognized him, Samuel Briggs, a former government official with deep ties to corruption, someone who had been implicated in numerous scandals but had never faced conviction. "Who is he?" Reynolds whispered. Veronica clenched her jaw. "He's not just behind Wallace. He's the one pulling the strings of an entire system." Briggs smirked. "Did you really think taking down Wallace meant victory? He was just a pawn. You have no idea how big this game really is." Veronica tightened her grip on her gun. "Your game ends here." Briggs shook his head slowly. "No, Agent Carter. It's only just begun." With a flick of his wrist, he pressed a button on a control panel. A series of beeping sounds echoed through the warehouse. "Bomb!" Reynolds shouted. Briggs stepped back, moving toward a hidden passage as a door slid open behind him. "Good luck, FBI," he said, before disappearing. The warehouse began to shake. Veronica rushed to free Mitchell, while SWAT agents desperately worked to disarm the bomb. "We have to get out," Reynolds yelled. Mitchell, still weak, staggered to his feet with Veronica's help. They bolted for the exit, leaping out just as a massive explosion ripped through the building behind them. The force of the blast knocked them to the ground. As the dust settled, they turned to see the warehouse engulfed in flames. Briggs had escaped. Veronica clenched her fists. He's still out there, but not for long. Mitchell, his face still pale but filled with determination, nodded. "We're going to take him down." Reynolds exhaled sharply. "We just uncovered a real monster." Veronica pulled out her phone, dialing headquarters. "We have a bigger problem than Wallace. I want a specialized task force focused entirely on Samuel Briggs. I won't let him slip away." Meanwhile, a black SUV sped down an empty highway, Briggs seated in the back, watching his phone screen intently. His expression was unreadable, no fear, no concern. He knew the FBI was after him, but that didn't faze him. He had escaped worse before. "Do we have an extraction plan?" one of his operatives asked, voice laced with tension. Briggs tapped his fingers against the phone. "Relax. The FBI can't touch me as long as I still have my leverage. They want to play big? I'll show them who really controls this game." Back at FBI headquarters, Veronica, Reynolds, and their elite task force scoured every lead on Briggs. FBI surveillance had flagged suspicious financial transactions, tracing back to a clandestine organization with powerful figures in government and high-level finance. "I don't think Briggs is acting alone," Reynolds said. "He's backed by people with real power. If we're not careful, we might be stepping into a war we can't win." Veronica's expression hardened. "I don't care how powerful they are. There's only one thing that matters. Briggs has to go down." Mitchell, still bandaged but refusing to rest, stepped into the briefing room. "If we want to take him down, we need a decisive move." Reynolds stared at the glowing screen displaying Briggs's movements. "We can trap him. But we need bait." Veronica took a deep breath, eyes locked onto the monitor. "I'll be the bait." A message flashed across Briggs' phone screen. "I have the information you want. Meet me at the old spot. Come alone." Briggs stared at the screen, contemplating. He knew this could be a trap, but if Veronica Carter truly had the intel he was after, he couldn't afford to ignore it. Veronica stood alone, cloaked in the darkness of the deserted warehouse, waiting. A sleek black SUV rolled into the lot, its headlights slicing through the gloom. The car door opened. Briggs stepped out. "What game are you playing, Agent Carter?" he asked, his voice dripping with confidence. Veronica didn't answer immediately. She locked eyes with him, her stance unwavering. "I know you're not working alone," she finally said. "I want names." Briggs laughed, loud and mocking. "Do you really think I'd just hand them over? I'm part of something much bigger than you can comprehend." Veronica remained unfazed. "We'll see." Then, with a subtle hand signal, Sirens wailed from every direction. FBI vehicles swarmed the warehouse, surrounding the area within seconds. Briggs took a step back, realizing he was boxed in. Yet, he didn't panic. Instead, he smirked. "You think you've won, Carter?" he said smoothly. "This is just the beginning." Reynolds stepped forward, gun drawn. "Briggs, you're under arrest. There's nowhere left to run." Briggs casually lifted his wrist, pressing a concealed button on his watch. A series of distant explosions erupted. The entire power grid in the area shut down, plunging everything into darkness. In the brief moment of confusion, Briggs vanished into the shadows. Veronica spun around, furious. "He planned this from the start." Mitchell grabbed his radio. "All units, fan out. Do not let him escape." But in the pitch-black chaos, Briggs had already moved on to his next play. And this time, he wasn't just targeting Veronica Carter. He was coming for the entire FBI. Briggs had vanished into the darkness, but he wasn't alone. He had help. As the FBI scrambled to locate him, a shocking revelation came to light. Briggs's tracking data had been erased from the system. That could only mean one thing. There was a mole inside the FBI. Reynolds slammed his hand on the conference table. "We have a traitor. Someone is helping Briggs escape." Mitchell frowned, scanning the list of agents with access to the case files. "Only 3 people could have done this without detection. You, me, and—" Veronica clenched her fists. "Agent Daniel Norris." Daniel Norris, a seasoned FBI agent, had been their colleague for years, but recently his actions had been suspicious. The question wasn't just if Norris had betrayed them. It was who he was working for. Veronica turned to Reynolds. "We can't let him know we suspect him. If he's the mole, he'll tip off Briggs." Reynolds nodded. "Then we set a trap. This time, no escape." The traitor slip Veronica and her team tailed Norris in secret, waiting for him to make a mistake. At midnight, they watched as he left FBI headquarters, driving toward an underground parking lot. Inside his car, Norris activated his phone, calling a mysterious contact. "Briggs, I did what you asked, but we need to be careful. The FBI is tracking everything." In a hidden safe house, Briggs listened to the call, smirking. "Good, but I need more time. I'm not done yet." Veronica and the FBI intercepted the entire conversation through surveillance. She exchanged a look with Mitchell. "We have enough proof. It's time to end this." Briggs' plan unfolds. The FBI launched an operation to capture Briggs, deploying a special tactical team to his suspected hideout. But when they arrived, they found only an empty command center. With multiple surveillance monitors displaying live feeds from inside FBI headquarters, Reynolds froze. "He's watching us. From the inside?" A chill ran down Veronica's spine. "No. He planted someone inside the FBI long ago. He knew we were coming." Mitchell pointed to a screen displaying live security footage. "Look, Norris. He's in the FBI server room. He's about to erase all data on Briggs." No time to hesitate. Veronica and Mitchell raced back to FBI headquarters. The final betrayal. By the time they stormed into the server room, Norris was already at the main terminal, entering the final security override. Before he could finish, Veronica raised her gun. "Don't move, Norris." Norris spun around, his face filled with panic. "You don't understand, Carter. This isn't about Briggs. This is about something much bigger." Reynolds stepped forward, his voice ice cold. "We'll find out the truth, but you won't be able to hide it anymore." Norris clenched his jaw, knowing he was caught. Slowly, he raised his hands. But before anyone could react, he pressed a hidden button on his watch. A message flashed on his screen. "It's time for Plan B." Veronica's eyes narrowed. Plan B? Just then, Reynolds' phone rang. An urgent voice on the other end. "FBI headquarters is under attack. We have a large-scale breach. Norris laughed maniacally. You think arresting me is the end? No, Carter. This is just the beginning. Immediately, alarms blared throughout the building. On the surveillance monitors, masked gunmen stormed FBI headquarters, heavily armed. Veronica gritted her teeth. We walked right into his trap. Briggs didn't run. He's launching an attack on us right here. Mitchell swallowed hard. If we don't stop them now, the entire FBI system could be wiped out. Reynolds gave the order. All units, take defensive positions. We're not letting them win. Gunfire erupted outside. The war had just begun. Gunfire echoed throughout FBI headquarters. The attackers, heavily armed and highly coordinated, stormed the main corridors, firing at anything in their path. FBI personnel scrambled for cover while security teams fought back. Veronica, Mitchell, and Reynolds moved swiftly, keeping to the shadows, using walls for cover as bullets ricocheted around them. They knew exactly where to hit, Reynolds panted. Someone inside fed them intel. Mitchell clenched his jaw. Norris wasn't working alone. Briggs has more than one mole. We need to protect the data center, Veronica ordered. If they wipe our system, all evidence against Briggs is gone. The team rushed toward the FBI data center, but just as they neared it, a grenade exploded in front of them, forcing them back. From the darkness, a voice emerged. You're too late, Carter. Briggs stepped forward, dressed in a sleek gray suit, completely unfazed. Beside him stood Norris, now fully exposed as a traitor. He raised his gun, aiming directly at Veronica. You can't win, Briggs said, tapping on his smartwatch. We don't live in an age of justice anymore, Agent Carter. We live in an age of controlling the narrative. Veronica didn't flinch. You think you can erase everything, Briggs? You think you can cover up your crimes? Briggs smirked. I don't need to erase anything. I just need to control the story. He gestured toward a large screen in the control room. The monitors flashed with live news coverage of the FBI internal attack. Sensational headlines dominated the screen. Terrorist attack on FBI? FBI compromised from within. Mitchell's eyes widened. He's manipulating the media, Briggs continued. Don't you see, Carter? Even if you arrest me, I still control the game. I've orchestrated everything to make the FBI look like a corrupt, crumbling agency. The public won't stand with you. Veronica exhaled slowly, unfazed. You really think I'll let you have the last word? Briggs chuckled. Shoot me now, and you'll turn me into a martyr. Arrest me, and I'll silence every witness before they can speak. Reynolds discreetly pressed a button on his earpiece. Then he looked at Veronica. Carter, we have another option. Veronica's eyes flickered with realization. You've been recording this entire conversation, haven't you? Briggs's expression changed. His confidence wavered for the first time. Norris glanced around, panic settling in. What the hell is happening? Mitchell smirked. We know how to control information too, Briggs. On the large screen, a live video broadcast began playing. Briggs' own confession. Every word he had spoken, every manipulation, every admission of guilt was now being transmitted worldwide. Briggs staggered back. No, this isn't possible. Panic set in. Norris, realizing they were doomed, suddenly turned his gun toward Veronica. But before he could pull the trigger, a gunshot rang out. Reynolds fired first. Norris collapsed, his betrayal ending in silence. Briggs looked around, seeing no escape. The control room doors burst open, FBI agents swarming in, weapons raised. Veronica stepped forward, locking eyes with him. Game over, Briggs. Briggs let out a bitter laugh. Maybe, but this war was never over, Carter. Reynolds nodded. Take him away. Mitchell exhaled in relief as Briggs was handcuffed and led out. Veronica turned to Reynolds. We may have won this battle, but he's right. The war isn't over. Reynolds nodded. Then we'll always be ready. Outside FBI headquarters, camera flashes erupted as the media swarmed the scene. But this time, Briggs wasn't controlling the story. This time, truth and justice had won. 3 days after Briggs's arrest, the FBI held a major press conference announcing their victory over a deeply rooted corruption network. The recording of Briggs's confession had sent shockwaves through the public, sparking multiple high-profile investigations into government and law enforcement officials. But not everyone was happy with this outcome. Veronica sat in her office, staring at the piles of fresh documents that had just landed on her desk. A long list of officials linked to Briggs, some already arrested, but many still hiding in the shadows. She knew the fight wasn't over. The door creaked open. Mitchell walked in, carrying an envelope. "You're going to want to see this," he said, setting it down. Veronica opened the letter. Inside was a single note. "You think you've won? We are still here." Her eyes narrowed. "Briggs still has allies out there." The door opened again. Reynolds stepped in, his face grim. "I just got word. One of our key witnesses, the one who was ready to testify against Briggs, has been murdered." Veronica immediately stood up. "They're cleaning up loose ends. They're silencing anyone who could expose the truth." Mitchell clenched his fists. "Then we need to move faster." Reynolds nodded. "I've requested the FBI to expand the investigation, but we need to be careful. If we keep pushing forward, they won't hesitate to strike back." Veronica looked around the office, a deep sense of unease settling in. Briggs's arrest didn't mean he had lost. An organization like his wouldn't fall in one night. She exhaled slowly, her resolve hardening. "We need to find out who's really behind all of this." Because this war was far from over. Somewhere else, in a dimly lit room, a middle-aged man in an expensive suit sat in the shadows, watching the news broadcast of Briggs's arrest. He took a slow sip of whiskey, his sharp eyes betraying no concern. A subordinate entered. "Sir, Briggs has been captured. The FBI is closing in." The man set down his glass, exhaling calmly. Briggs served his purpose. Now, he's just another discarded pawn. The subordinate hesitated. "Should we intervene?" The man smirked coldly. "Number let them think they've won. But while they celebrate, we'll deliver the next strike." He stood, gazing out at the glittering skyline from a high-rise office tower. "Send a message to our embedded agent inside the FBI. It's time to act." As Veronica left FBI headquarters, her phone buzzed. An anonymous message flashed on the screen. "Trust no one, not even those on your team." She stopped in her tracks, a chill creeping up her spine. Footsteps approached. Mitchell stepped beside her, noticing her tense expression. "What is it?" She held up the screen. Mitchell frowned. "Could be a prank, or a real warning." Reynolds approached, catching the conversation. "If someone is embedded inside the FBI, we're dealing with something far bigger than we imagined." Veronica glanced around, suddenly aware of the walls closing in. She knew one thing for sure: this wasn't over. It was just beginning. Less than an hour after the anonymous warning, the FBI received an emergency alert. A shooting had just taken place outside a cafe downtown. Veronica and Mitchell rushed to the scene, only to find a bullet-ridden FBI vehicle, its windows shattered, doors riddled with holes. Inside, a senior FBI agent lay dead in the driver's seat. Reynolds arrived, his expression grim. "That's Special Agent Gregson. He was investigating one of the files linked to Briggs. It looks like our enemies aren't wasting time." Mitchell clenched his jaw. "They're sending a message." Veronica knelt beside the car, her sharp eyes scanning the scene. She noticed a fallen phone nearby, its screen still illuminated. When she picked it up, The last message on the screen flashed before her eyes. I found a name. He is. But the rest of the message had been erased. Veronica exhaled sharply. Gregson figured something out, and they killed him instantly. She looked at Reynolds and Mitchell, her expression resolute. That means we're getting close to the truth. Back at FBI headquarters, Veronica and her team immediately dug into Gregson's last accessed files. Before he was murdered, Gregson had uncovered a classified document, a list of secret banking transactions tied to the corruption network. But one name stood out, leaving the entire team in stunned silence. Jonathan Keller, FBI Deputy Director. Mitchell stared at the screen, shaking his head. We're talking about the second in command of the FBI? The one overseeing this entire investigation? Reynolds clenched his fists. If Keller is involved, that means the entire bureau is being manipulated from within. Veronica's eyes narrowed. We can't move against him directly. We need undeniable proof. Mitchell nodded. Then we play by their rules, quietly, but precisely. As night fell, Veronica, Mitchell, and Reynolds devised a plan to monitor Keller without exposing themselves. A deep-cover agent would track his movements, recording his conversations and identifying his key allies. But in the shadows, another scheme was already unfolding. At a hidden location, Keller sat across from a shadowy figure. Our operation has been compromised, Keller said, his voice tense. Carter and her team are getting too close. If we don't act now, everything collapses. The man across from him chuckled, unconcerned. Then eliminate them. Keller exhaled sharply. If we fail, I won't be the only one to fall. The entire system will come crashing down. The man stepped into the light. Charles Donovan, one of the most powerful financiers in America, the true mastermind pulling the strings from behind the scenes. Donovan's gaze was razor-sharp, his voice deadly calm. Don't you get it, Keller? We can't fail. If the FBI wins, our entire empire is wiped out. Keller hesitated, but then his doubt turned to determination. I'll handle Carter, but I need to ensure no one stands in our way. Donovan smirked. Then make sure she disappears, permanently. After confirming Keller's involvement, Veronica and her team devised a plan to capture him without giving him a chance to escape. But they knew, given his position, he wouldn't go down easily. Mitchell stood in front of the whiteboard, outlining the strategy. We can't just arrest him with these documents. We need a confession. Reynolds nodded. We make him think he's still in control. A trap was set. Veronica would fake losing control, requesting a secret meeting with Keller under the guise of negotiating for her own survival. When Keller slipped up, the FBI would capture the evidence and arrest him on the spot. The final move had begun. Veronica walked into Keller's private conference room. He sat behind his large polished desk, calmly watching her with a calculating gaze. I know who you are and what you've done, Veronica said, her voice firm. But I don't care about Briggs or Donovan. I just want out of this mess. Keller raised an eyebrow. Are you trying to negotiate, Carter? I didn't take you for someone who gives up so easily. Veronica kept her expression unreadable. I know the FBI won't protect me. I need a way out, and you can give me that. Keller studied her, then chuckled. You really think I'd believe that? You're one of the most stubborn agents I've ever met. He stood up, walking toward the window, his hands behind his back. But I do admire people who know when to switch sides. Veronica remained poised, but before she could respond, Keller's phone rang. He answered, his expression shifting instantly as a cold voice came through the speaker. Carter is playing you. Her team is listening in. End this now. Keller's eyes darkened. Slowly, he set the phone down, turning back to Veronica with an icy smile. I think you just made a very big mistake. Before Veronica could react, The door burst open. Two heavily armed guards stormed in, guns drawn. From a surveillance van nearby, Mitchell and Reynolds saw the plan collapsing in real time. "Shit! They've made us!" Reynolds shouted. Inside, Veronica moved first. She spun, striking one guard in the throat, wrestled his weapon from his grip, and fired a shot at Keller. Keller ducked behind his desk, narrowly avoiding the bullet. Mitchell and the FBI team stormed the building, but Keller's security forces were already in position. A fierce gunfight erupted in the hallways. Keller bolted through a secret exit. Veronica immediately pursued, chasing him up the stairwell toward the rooftop, where a helicopter was waiting. Veronica burst onto the rooftop, her gun raised. "End of the line, Keller!" she shouted. Keller turned, smirking as he stepped toward the waiting chopper. "You really think you can stop me, Carter?" he sneered. "I'm not the only one. You can arrest me, but men like me will always exist." Mitchell and Reynolds arrived, but Keller was already boarding the helicopter. As the aircraft lifted off, Veronica took a deep breath and fired one precise shot, hitting the engine. The helicopter spun wildly, smoke pouring from its side, before it crashed in a fiery explosion below. Veronica stood at the edge, catching her breath, watching the wreckage smolder below. Mitchell approached her. "Keller is finished, but Donovan is still out there." Veronica clenched her fists. "Then we end this game, once and for all." Veronica stepped into Jonathan Keller's private conference room. He sat behind his large mahogany desk, his expression calm and unreadable as he watched her. "I know who you are and what you've done," Veronica said, her voice steady, unwavering. "But I don't care about Briggs or Donovan. I just want out of this mess." Keller raised an eyebrow. "Are you trying to negotiate, Carter?" "I didn't take you for someone who gives up so easily." Veronica kept her face neutral. "I know the FBI won't protect me. I need a way out, and you can give me that." Keller studied her, then chuckled softly. "You actually expect me to believe that? You're one of the most stubborn agents I've ever met." He stood up, walking toward the window, hands behind his back. "But I do admire people who know when to switch sides." Veronica remained poised, calculating her next move. But then Keller's phone rang. He answered, his expression shifting instantly as a cold voice came through the speaker. "Carter is playing you. Her team is listening in. End this now." Keller's eyes darkened. Slowly, he set the phone down, turning back to Veronica with a cold, knowing smile. "I think you just made a very big mistake." Before Veronica could react, the door burst open. Two armed guards stormed in, weapons raised. From a surveillance van nearby, Mitchell and Reynolds saw the plan unraveling in real time. "Damn it, they've made us," Reynolds shouted. Inside, Veronica moved first. She lunged, disarming one of the guards in a swift, fluid motion, grabbing his gun and firing a shot toward Keller. Keller ducked behind his desk, narrowly avoiding the bullet. Mitchell and the FBI team breached the building, but Keller's security forces were waiting. A fierce gunfight erupted in the hallways. Keller slipped through a hidden exit. Veronica sprinted after him, following him up the stairwell to the rooftop, where a helicopter was waiting. Veronica burst onto the rooftop, her gun aimed at Keller. "End of the line, Keller!" she yelled. Keller turned, smirking, walking toward the waiting chopper. "You really think you can stop me, Carter?" he sneered. "I'm not the only one. Arrest me, and another will take my place." Mitchell and Reynolds rushed onto the rooftop, but Keller was already stepping into the helicopter. As it began to lift off, Veronica took a deep breath and fired. A perfect shot hit the engine. The helicopter sputtered, spinning wildly in the air, smoke pouring from its side, before it plummeted to the ground, exploding on impact. Veronica stood at the edge, catching her breath, watching the flames engulf the wreckage below. Mitchell stepped beside her. Keller is gone, but Donovan is still out there. Veronica clenched her fists. Then we end this. Once and for all. Veronica stood in front of FBI headquarters, feeling the early morning chill brush against her skin. The battle against Donovan was over, but she knew this wasn't truly the end. The corrupt system he built still had roots, and the powerful figures behind him were likely still operating from the shadows. Mitchell, still recovering from his injuries, stepped beside her. "Did we really finish this?" he asked. Veronica shook her head. "Not exactly. We cut off part of the monster, but I'm sure there are more behind Donovan." Reynolds arrived, holding a thick dossier. "You're right," he said grimly. "These are financial records connected to Donovan. Some of them trace back to accounts in Russia, China, and the Middle East. If he was just a pawn in a bigger network, then we've only just begun." Veronica sighed, gripping the file tightly. "It looks like we just stepped into another war." Mitchell nodded. "Then we keep fighting." Following a cryptic warning, Veronica immediately called an emergency briefing with Reynolds and Mitchell. The situation had escalated far beyond internal corruption. It was now an international conspiracy that posed a national security threat. "We might have taken down Donovan, but he clearly wasn't the mastermind," Reynolds said, tossing a classified file onto the table. "The Omega Plan isn't just a vague threat, it's a real operation." Mitchell flipped through the pages, his eyes narrowing. "She's become their #1 target." Veronica raised an eyebrow. "She?" Reynolds nodded. "The leader of the Omega Plan isn't a man. It's a woman, Elena Morozov, a former Russian intelligence operative. She now runs a global criminal network." Veronica's jaw clenched. "So now, we're not just dealing with internal corruption. We're up against an international espionage ring." Mitchell's expression hardened. "And we have only one option: strike first before they can make their move." That night, as Veronica returned to her apartment, she felt something was off. She drew her gun, moving silently through the darkness. The moment she closed the door, she heard it. A faint noise from the living room. Before she could react, a shadow moved toward her at lightning speed. She instinctively rolled to the side, firing a shot, but her attacker had already vanished. A dagger embedded itself into the wall, right where she had been standing. She pivoted, her gun aimed at the corner of the room. "Show yourself." From the shadows, a woman emerged. Elena Morozov. Elena smirked. "You're impressive, Carter, but no one escapes the Omega Plan." Instead of killing Veronica outright, she made an offer. "You have two choices. 1, you work for me. 2, you won't live past tomorrow." Veronica didn't blink. "I will never betray the FBI." Elena chuckled, unfazed. "I hope you reconsider. Because if you don't, I won't just kill you. I will destroy everything you love." Veronica met her gaze, unshaken. "You made a mistake thinking I would be afraid." Elena's smirk widened. "We'll see about that." Immediately after her face-to-face encounter with Elena, Veronica knew she couldn't stay at her apartment. She grabbed essential documents, packed her gear, and vanished into the night. Minutes later, a black SUV pulled up in front of her building. 2 masked operatives stepped out, but Veronica was already gone. She called Mitchell, her voice urgent. "I'm being followed. I'm heading to the safe house." Mitchell and Reynolds activated emergency protocols. They had a secure location ready, but they knew one thing for certain: Elena wouldn't stop hunting Veronica. Reynolds placed a thick dossier on the table. "Elena isn't just a killer. She runs an international network for arms trafficking and intelligence leaks. If we follow the money trail, we can locate her headquarters." Veronica nodded. "Then we strike first, before she can make her next move." Mitchell pointed to a monitor displaying financial records. "We traced her transactions. One of her primary locations is a heavily guarded estate outside Moscow." Veronica clenched her fists. Then we bring the fight straight to her doorstep. FBI and Russian intelligence launched a coordinated assault on Elena's stronghold. As special forces stormed the estate, they were met with heavy resistance from her mercenaries. Veronica, Mitchell, and Reynolds led the charge, pushing through the estate's defenses and breaching the control room. But by the time they got there, Elena was already gone. A helicopter lifted off from the rooftop, carrying her away. Veronica raised her gun, firing at the engine, but it was too late. "Damn it!" Mitchell shouted. "She got away!" Reynolds stared at a still-active computer screen. "But we have all of her data. We can dismantle her entire network." Veronica exhaled sharply. "Elena may have escaped, but we're not stopping now. This isn't over." Instead of going into hiding, Elena struck back. She leaked falsified intelligence to global media outlets, framing the FBI as rogue agents who had carried out an unauthorized attack on foreign soil. As news spread like wildfire, public backlash erupted against the Bureau. Mitchell slammed a stack of reports onto the desk. "She's controlling the narrative. If we don't take back control, we'll be the criminals." Reynolds scowled. "We need solid evidence to prove what she's done." Veronica's eyes burned with determination. We end this. Now." Intel revealed Elena's hiding place, a fortified compound in Istanbul. Knowing this could be their last chance, Veronica and her team launched a full-scale assault. The battle was brutal. Gunfights raged through the compound's dark corridors as Veronica, Mitchell, and Reynolds pushed forward. At last, Veronica found Elena alone in a dimly lit room. They stood face to face, two warriors at the end of a long war. Elena drew her gun, but Veronica was faster. "It's over, Morozov," Elena smiled coldly. "You really think arresting me changes anything?" Veronica pulled the trigger. A single gunshot rang out. Elena collapsed to the floor, gasping. But just before she lost consciousness, she whispered, "You can't stop what has already begun." Mitchell and Reynolds rushed in. "We have all her data. This is the end." Veronica stared at Elena's motionless body. This is just the beginning." The next morning, the FBI held a press conference, announcing Elena Morozov's death and the collapse of the Omega Plan. But not long after, top-secret intelligence surfaced, proving that Elena's network was still operational. Mitchell threw another dossier onto the table. "We took her down, but her network isn't gone." Reynolds nodded. "She didn't work alone. There are still powerful figures pulling the strings. We have to keep going." Veronica gazed at the files. A long list of high-ranking officials, business moguls, and spies, all still active. She took a deep breath. "If this isn't the end, then we keep fighting." From the darkness, a new figure emerged. Viktor Sokolov, a Russian financial mogul, the silent benefactor behind Elena Morozov. He watched the news of her death, his face devoid of emotion. A trusted aide approached. "Do you wish to take revenge?" Sokolov took a slow sip of whiskey, then smirked. "No need to rush. Let Veronica Carter believe she has won. When she least expects it, we will strike." He picked up his phone, dialing a hidden number. "Activate Operation Dark Night. Carter is now a top priority." The next morning, Veronica received an unmarked envelope. Inside, a single note read, "We are still watching you." She clenched her fist, her instincts screaming that this was far from over. The real war had just begun. FBI tracked Sokolov's movements. He had left Russia, setting up operations in a hidden underground facility in Zurich, where he was preparing his ultimate revenge, Operation Dark Night. If successful, FBI's entire covert network would be exposed. Every agent's identity would be leaked. It wouldn't just end Veronica's career, it would cripple national security. Veronica, Mitchell, Reynolds, and an elite tactical unit planned their most dangerous raid yet. "We end this in his own den," Reynolds said, double-checking his weapon. "This time, no one escapes." As FBI agents approached, they were ambushed. Sokolov's mercenaries, armed with cutting-edge weaponry, engaged them in a brutal firefight. The narrow corridors became a deadly maze of bullets and explosions. Veronica and Mitchell pushed forward, fighting their way to the control room. There, Sokolov waited, watching the battle through security monitors. When he saw Veronica enter, he simply smiled. "You really think you can stop me?" Veronica raised her gun. "The game is over, Sokolov." Sokolov laughed, raising his hands in mock surrender. But as he did, he pressed a button on his console. A countdown timer flashed on the massive screens. 3:00, 2:59. "You may have caught me," he said, "but my system is already in motion. In less than 3 minutes, all classified data will be leaked worldwide." Reynolds yelled into his earpiece, "We have less than 3 minutes to shut it down." Mitchell rushed to the central servers, frantically bypassing security firewalls. Veronica pressed Sokolov against the wall, her gun digging into his ribs. "Stop it, now," Sokolov smirked. "You can't stop the inevitable." Veronica's eyes darkened, and without hesitation, she shot him in the leg. Sokolov screamed, collapsing in pain. "Is that your final answer?" she hissed. Through gritted teeth, he spat out, "The code, 4681, stops the countdown." Mitchell typed in the override command. The timer froze at 0012 seconds. They had won, but just barely. As FBI agents secured Sokolov, Veronica watched him struggle against his restraints. "You think this ends with me?" he sneered. "There are bigger players than me in this game." Veronica stepped closer. "Then we'll hunt them down too." Mitchell and Reynolds secured the hard drives, every bit of intelligence Sokolov had. "It's over," Reynolds said. Veronica looked at Sokolov one last time. "Number? It's just beginning." FBI successfully apprehended Viktor Sokolov and his entire network. Operation Dark Night was neutralized. The identities of hundreds of undercover agents remained safe, but the victory came at a cost, a war that left scars. Mitchell, severely injured, was rushed to the hospital. Reynolds, wounded but still standing strong, remained at Veronica's side as she watched Sokolov being escorted away. The Russian crime lord turned to her one last time, his eyes burning with defiance. "You think you've won, Carter?" Veronica said nothing. She just stood there, her expression unreadable. Reynolds placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "We did it." Veronica took a deep breath. "Yes. But there will always be another threat waiting in the shadows." Veronica sat in her office at FBI headquarters. Mitchell had recovered and was returning to active duty. Reynolds remained busy, overseeing operations to dismantle the remnants of the Omega network. Just as she started reviewing a case file, her phone buzzed with an incoming message. She glanced at the screen. "Never forget. The shadows are always watching you." Veronica stared at the words for a moment. Then, without hesitation, she deleted the message. She knew this war would never truly be over. There would always be another enemy, another fight, another war. But that didn't matter, because she would always be ready. Always.